Picture this. You wake up, check your bank balance, pay your mortgage, swipe your credit card for coffee, check your credit score, transfer money to your savings account, all before 9 a.m. But here's the question nobody asks. When did we agree to this? When did humanity decide that every single person would be permanently woven into an invisible web of debts, credits, interest rates, and financial obligations? A system so totalizing that opting out isn't just difficult, it's virtually impossible. You didn't design this system. Your grandparents didn't either. Yet here we are, billions of humans, participating in a financial architecture that feels as natural as breathing, as inevitable as gravity. But what if I told you this system was deliberately constructed, that its foundations were laid by philosophers, economists, and power brokers across centuries? That the feeling of being trapped isn't a bug, it's a feature. Welcome back to the Economic Philosopher, where we explore the hidden intersections of history, psychology, and economic theory. Today, we're asking a question that might make you uncomfortable. Is modern finance a prison we're all born into? The hook I just posed isn't hyperbole. The modern financial system operates with a comprehensiveness that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors. From birth certificates with social security numbers to credit scores that follow us to the grave, we're ensnared in financial relationships before we can even speak. But this didn't happen by accident. This system has deep roots, philosophical roots, historical roots, psychological roots. The problem is that we're taught to see finance as purely technical. Interest rates, stock markets, monetary policy, these seem like neutral mathematical phenomena. But underneath every financial instrument, every banking regulation, every credit algorithm, lies a set of assumptions about human nature, about value, about control. And once you see these assumptions, you can never look at your bank statement the same way again. In this video, we're going on a journey. We'll start in ancient Mesopotamia, where the very concept of debt was born. We'll visit medieval Europe, where the philosophical justification for lending money changed civilization. We'll examine the psychological mechanisms that make us complicit in our own financial captivity. And we'll end by asking, can we escape? Should we even try? By the end of this exploration, you'll understand not just how the financial system works, but why it feels so inescapable. You'll see the invisible chains and maybe, just maybe, you'll spot a way to loosen them. Let's start at the beginning. Not the beginning of your financial life, but the beginning of finance itself. Around 3500 BCE, in ancient Sumer, in what is now southern Iraq, something revolutionary happened. Humanity invented written language. But here's what most history books don't emphasize. We didn't invent writing to record poetry or philosophy. We invented it to track debts. The earliest cuneiform tablets we've discovered aren't epic tales or religious texts. They're accounting records. Who owes whom, how much grain, when it's due. The very first words humans committed to permanent record were financial obligations. Think about that. Before we wrote down our myths, our laws, or our love songs, we wrote down who owed what. This tells us something profound. Debt isn't some modern inconvenience. It's foundational to human civilization. But here's where it gets interesting. In ancient Mesopotamia, debt worked differently than it does today. When someone couldn't pay their debts, they would enter into debt bondage, essentially becoming a servant to their creditor. This created an obvious problem. If too many people fell into debt bondage, you'd have a society full of indentured servants and nobody free to be soldiers, farmers, or citizens. So Mesopotamian kings instituted something called a debt jubilee. Periodically, often, when a new king took power, all debts would be canceled, slaves freed, obligations erased. Society reset. Now contrast that with our world. We have no debt jubilee, we have bankruptcy, sure, but it comes with a scarlet letter that marks your credit report for 7 to 10 years. We have student loan debt that follows you to the grave, that can't be discharged even in bankruptcy. We have mortgage debt deliberately structured to last 30 years longer than the average medieval serf was bound to their lord's land. The ancient Mesopotamians understood that debt, left unchecked, becomes a form of permanent control. Modern finance forgot this lesson, or perhaps more cynically, it remembered it all too well. Moving forward in history, we encounter another crucial development, the medieval European debate over usury. For over 1,000 years, Christianity banned usury, the charging of interest on loans. This wasn't just religious squeamishness, it was based on philosophical reasoning from Aristotle, who argued that money is sterile. Money doesn't reproduce. A cow can give birth to calves, justifying the rent of the cow, but a coin doesn't give birth to more coins. Therefore, charging interest-making money for money was considered unnatural, even immoral. This philosophical stance created a problem for emerging capitalism. How could you have economic growth, investment, or banking without interest? The solution came gradually through careful reinterpretation. By the Renaissance, thinkers like John Calvin argued that interest could be justified if the lender was foregoing other profitable uses of their money. Interest became compensation for opportunity cost. This shift wasn't just economic, it was philosophical. It represented a fundamental reimagining of time, value, and human relationships. Once you accept that money can generate more money simply through the passage of time, you've accepted a worldview where financial growth becomes not just acceptable, but expected, morally neutral, even virtuous. This is where compound interest enters the story. Albert Einstein supposedly called it the eighth wonder of the world, saying he who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it. Whether he actually said this is debatable, but the sentiment reveals a crucial truth. Compound interest is the mathematical engine of modern finance, and it creates an exponential curve that benefits lenders and traps borrowers. Consider this. If you have a credit card with a 20% annual interest rate and you maintain a $5,000 balance while making only minimum payments, you'll pay back far more than you borrowed, often double or triple the original amount over time. The bank isn't just being compensated for risk or opportunity cost, they're extracting wealth from you continuously using the mathematical properties of exponential growth. Now, expand this principle to an entire economy. When money creation itself is based on debt, which it is in our fractional reserve banking system, the entire economy must grow exponentially just to service existing debts. This isn't a choice, it's structural. The system demands perpetual growth, perpetual consumption, perpetual expansion. This is what makes it inescapable. You're not just participating in an economy. You're caught in an exponential function that, by its very nature, cannot slow down or stop without collapsing. Let's zoom out and ask, what philosophical assumptions underpin modern finance? First, there's the assumption of rational economic man homo economicus. This concept, developed by Enlightenment thinkers and formalized by economists like John Stuart Mill, suggests that humans are fundamentally rational actors who make decisions to maximize their utility. This isn't just an innocent abstraction, it's the bedrock of modern economic policy, financial regulation, and market design. If humans are rational, then markets are efficient. If markets are efficient, then prices reflect true value. If prices reflect true value, then the system is fair. But what if humans aren't rational? What if we're predictably irrational, as behavioral economist Dan Ariely argues? Then the entire philosophical foundation crumbles. Yet the system persists, designed as if we are rational, knowing full well we're not. Credit card companies know you're not rationally calculating interest rates when you swipe. Payday lenders know you're not rationally assessing alternatives when you're desperate. The entire predatory lending industry is built on the gap between the philosophical assumption and the psychological reality. This brings us to a darker philosophical underpinning, the idea of individual responsibility. Classical liberalism, from John Locke onward, emphasized individual rights and individual accountability. You own your labor, you own your property, you own your choices. This philosophy became weaponized in financial contexts. Can't pay your mortgage? That's your failure of personal responsibility. Drowning in student debt? You should have made better choices. Lost everything in a financial crisis caused by systemic fraud. Should have read the fine print. The philosophical framework of individualism, which once liberated people from feudal obligations, now traps them in financial ones. Because if every financial outcome is the result of individual choice, then systemic critique becomes impossible. The system isn't broken. You're just not trying hard enough. Philosopher Michael Sandel, in his work on market reasoning, identifies how market logic has expanded into domains that were previously governed by other values: health, education, citizenship, even personal relationships, all increasingly mediated by financial transactions. This isn't just economic imperialism, it's ontological imperialism. It changes what we think we are. We're no longer citizens or souls or even just humans. We're portfolios, human capital. Our children's education isn't about flourishing, it's an investment with expected returns. Our health isn't intrinsically valuable a dollar value based on future productivity. Once this philosophical transformation is complete, escaping the financial system becomes conceptually impossible, because the financial system isn't external to you. It is you. Your identity is your credit score. Your worth is your net worth. Your freedom is your purchasing power. This is the deepest level of entrapment, not just economic necessity, but philosophical internalization. Now, let's examine the psychological mechanisms that make this system so effective at maintaining compliance. First, there's temporal discounting, our tendency to value immediate rewards over future consequences. Credit cards exploit this perfectly. The pleasure of the purchase is now. The pain of payment is later abstracted, minimized. Our brains aren't wired to rationally evaluate delayed consequences, and the financial system knows this. Behavioral economists like Richard Taylor have documented dozens of cognitive biases that the financial industry exploits. The endowment effect makes us overvalue what we own, leading to poor investment decisions. Anchoring makes us rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive, allowing manipulative pricing strategies. Loss aversion makes us more afraid of losing money than motivated to gain it, keeping us in low-return savings accounts, while inflation erodes our purchasing power. But beyond these individual biases, there's a more insidious psychological mechanism: normalization. When everyone around you has debt, debt becomes normal. When everyone has a mortgage, a car loan, credit cards, and student loans, these aren't seen as chains, they're seen as life. The system's ubiquity becomes its own justification. Psychologists call this social proof. If everyone's doing it, it must be right, or at least acceptable. The financial system leverages this by making indebtedness the default path. Want to go to college? You'll need loans. Want a house? You'll need a mortgage. Want a car? You'll need financing. The alternative, saving up, waiting, delaying gratification, becomes not just difficult, but socially aberrant. You're opting out, not just of financial products, but of social timelines. You're not behind because you're making bad decisions. You're behind because you're not participating in normalized debt structures. There's also the sunk cost fallacy. Once you're invested in the system, once you've spent years building credit, maintaining accounts, planning for retirement through market-based mechanisms, the psychological cost of abandoning it becomes prohibitive. You've already invested so much. Changing course feels like admitting defeat, like wasted effort. The system is psychologically sticky, not because it's designed to make you happy, but because it's designed to make leaving painful. Consider also the psychology of complexity. Modern financial products are deliberately opaque. Mortgage-backed securities, collateralized debt obligations, algorithmic trading. These aren't just complicated, they're incomprehensible to the vast majority of people, including many of the people designing and selling them. This complexity serves a purpose. It creates dependency on experts, on institutions, on the system itself. You can't opt out of something you don't understand. You can't critique something you can't see. The opacity is a feature, not a bug. It makes you feel stupid, inadequate, in need of guidance. And who provides that guidance? The very institutions that benefit from your participation. Finally, there's the psychology of aspiration. The financial system sells a dream. Work hard, invest wisely, and you can be free. You can be wealthy, you can be secure. This dream keeps people compliant through decades of financial servitude. It's always just around the corner. One more promotion, one more market upswing, one more smart investment. The dream is real for some, just enough to keep it believable for all. But statistically, social mobility is declining. Wealth inequality is increasing. The dream is becoming more distant, even as it's sold more aggressively. Yet the dream persists because it serves a crucial psychological function. It gives meaning to the struggle. It transforms exploitation into opportunity. It makes your debt feel like investment, your servitude feel like strategy. This might be the most sophisticated trap of all. The system doesn't just capture your present circumstances, it captures your imagination of the future. Now let's examine how these historical, philosophical, and psychological elements combine in the modern economic architecture. Start with money creation. Most people think money is created by the government, by central banks. But in our fractional reserve banking system, the vast majority of money is created by private banks when they issue loans. This means that almost all money in existence is simultaneously someone's debt. Think about the implications. Money itself is debt, not backed by debt, not representing debt. It is debt. When you hold $1, you're holding a claim on a system that only exists because somewhere, someone owes something. If all debts were paid off, there would be virtually no money in circulation. This creates an imperative. The system must expand. There must always be more debt tomorrow than there is today, or the money supply contracts, leading to deflation, economic crisis, collapse. You're not just encouraged to take on debt. The system requires it. Your mortgage isn't just profitable for the bank, it's structurally necessary for monetary stability. Now, consider the role of the state. Governments are complicit, not in a conspiratorial sense, but in a structural sense. Tax systems favor debt-financed homeownership through mortgage interest deductions. Student loans are backed by government guarantees. Central banks manipulate interest rates to encourage or discourage borrowing based on economic conditions. The state isn't a neutral referee, it's an active participant, using financial mechanisms as tools of policy. This creates a deeper level of inescapability. The legal and regulatory framework assumes your participation. Tax advantages, social programs, even legal protections are structured around financial system engagement. Try living without a bank account. Try renting an apartment without a credit history. Try getting a job without direct deposit. The formal economy is increasingly cashless, increasingly digital, increasingly mediated by financial institutions. Opting out means opting out of legibility to the state, to employers, to landlords. It means becoming invisible, vulnerable, excluded. This is what political philosopher James C. Scott calls legibility. The state needs to render its population legible, countable, taxable, controllable. Financial systems are powerful tools of legibility. Your transaction history tells the story of your life in granular detail. Your credit score reduces your complex humanity to a 3-digit risk assessment. And here's the key. This legibility is bidirectional. You need the system to recognize you just as much as it needs to recognize you. Without financial identity, you're a non-person in the modern economy. Now, let's talk about inflation. Inflation is often presented as a natural economic phenomenon, like weather. But inflation is a policy choice. Central banks target inflation rates typically around 2% annually. This means that money deliberately loses value over time. Why? Because inflation punishes saving and encourages spending and borrowing. If your cash loses 2% of its purchasing power every year, you're incentivized to invest it, to put it into the financial system where it can grow. Inflation is a mechanism of forced participation. Savers are punished. Borrowers are rewarded. This isn't incidental. It's the logical conclusion of a debt-based monetary system. If money is debt, then debt must be encouraged. The implications for individual lives are profound. You can't just earn money and hold it. You must invest it, grow it, risk it. Simply working and saving, the traditional virtue of past generations, is now a losing strategy. You must become a capitalist, even in miniature. You must participate in markets, take on risk, financialize your life. This is why retirement itself has been financialized. Previous generations had pensions guaranteed payments from employers or the state. But pensions have been replaced by 401ks, IRAs, and personal investment accounts. Your retirement security now depends on market performance, on the growth imperative of the system itself. This isn't just a transfer of risk from institutions to individuals. It's a mechanism of forced participation. You cannot opt out of markets and retire securely. The system is designed to make that impossible. Consider also the role of credit scoring. Your credit score, calculated by private companies using opaque algorithms, determines your access to housing, employment, and financial products. This score isn't just about whether you pay your debts, it's about your participation in debt itself. Having no credit history is almost as bad as having bad credit. You're rewarded not for avoiding debt, but for managing it successfully. The system wants you in debt, just in good debt, controlled debt, profitable debt. This creates a perverse incentive structure. To prove you're financially responsible, you must go into debt. To access credit, you must have used credit. It's circular, self-reinforcing, and utterly inescapable within the logic of the system. Finally, Let's examine the global dimension. The financial system we're describing isn't just national, it's global. The US dollar serves as the world's reserve currency. The International Monetary Fund and World Bank extend debt-based development models worldwide. Financial markets are interconnected through digital networks operating at the speed of light. This means that even alternative systems, local currencies, cooperative banks, mutual aid networks, exist within the shadow of the dominant system. They're marginal, fragile, permitted only insofar as they don't threaten the broader architecture. Entire nations are trapped in debt relationships through instruments like structural adjustment programs. Countries can't opt out without facing economic warfare sanctions, capital flight, currency collapse. If nations can't escape, what chance do individuals have? The system's inescapability isn't just personal, it's planetary. So where does this leave us? We've traced the historical roots of financial obligation from ancient Mesopotamia to modern credit scores. We've examined the philosophical assumptions that transformed usury from sin to cornerstone of economic growth. We've explored the psychological mechanisms that make us complicit in our own financial captivity. And we've analyzed the economic architecture that makes opting out virtually impossible. The question we started with was, is modern finance a prison we're all born into? The answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is yes. But with an important caveat, it's a prison most people don't recognize as such. It's a prison with entertainment, with opportunities for advancement, with the appearance of choice. It's a prison that convinces inmates they're free. But recognizing the prison is the first step toward freedom. So what are the actionable takeaways? First, cultivate financial literacy that goes beyond technical knowledge. Don't just learn how credit cards work. Understand why they work the way they do. See the incentive structures. Recognize the psychological exploitation. When you understand the system's logic, you can make more intentional choices about your relationship with it. Second, minimize your exposure to debt. This isn't about individual moral virtue. It's about reducing your vulnerability to systemic forces beyond your control. Every debt obligation is a chain. Fewer chains mean more freedom. This might mean living below your means, delaying major purchases, prioritizing savings over consumption. It's countercultural, but it's also protective. Third, build alternative forms of security and community. The system's power comes partly from monopolizing pathways to security. Diversify your safety nets, develop skills, cultivate relationships, engage in mutual aid. These aren't romantic gestures. They're practical strategies for reducing dependency. Fourth, support systemic reforms. Individual action is important, but individual action alone can't change architecture this deeply entrenched. Support policies that reduce financial predation, usury laws, debt jubilees, public banking, universal basic services. The system was designed by human choices. Different choices can redesign it. Fifth, maintain critical consciousness. The system wants you to internalize its logic so completely that you can't imagine alternatives. Resist this. Read philosophy, history, political economy. Understand that the current arrangement isn't natural or inevitable. It's historical, which means it can change. Finally, reframe that initial question. Instead of asking, can we escape, which implies the problem is individual, ask, how do we transform this? The goal isn't individual escape, but collective liberation. The ancient Mesopotamians understood that debts, left unchecked, destroy societies. They instituted periodic resets. We need modern equivalents: robust bankruptcy protections, student debt cancellation, homeowner protections, alternatives to debt-financed, higher education, and housing. These aren't radical proposals. They're conservative. In the truest sense, they aim to conserve human dignity, social stability, and genuine freedom. The philosophical roots of modern finance run deep. But roots can be dug up, systems can be redesigned. The inescapability you feel isn't metaphysical necessity. It's political choice, economic structure, social convention. And all of these can change. The first step is seeing the prison. The second is remembering that we hold the keys. If this analysis resonated with you, I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. What's your relationship with the financial system? Do you feel trapped, empowered, or something in between? What would genuine financial freedom look like for you? And if you found value in this deep dive, consider subscribing to the Economic Philosopher. We explore these intersections of history, philosophy, psychology, and economics every week. Always searching for the ideas that shape our world and the questions nobody else is asking. Check out the video I've linked in the description about the history of debt, and Jubilee It goes even deeper into the ancient practices we touched on today. Or watch our exploration of behavioral economics and how it's used to manipulate consumer choices. The algorithm shows this content to people who want to understand, not just consume. So your engagement genuinely helps us reach others who are searching for these deeper answers. This has been the Economic Philosopher. Remember, the unexamined economy isn't worth living in. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and question everything, especially the things that feel inevitable.